2 Samuel chapter 11, beginning at verse 14. In the morning David wrote a letter to Joab, and sent it with Uriah. In it he wrote, "Put Uriah out in front, where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him, so he will be struck down and die." So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at a place where he knew the strongest defenders were. When the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. Joab sent David a full account of the battle. He instructed the messenger, "When you have finished giving the king this account of the battle, the king's anger may flare up, and he may ask you, 'Why did you get so close to the city to fight? Didn't you know they would shoot arrows from the wall? Who killed Abimelech son of Jerubbesheth? Didn't a woman drop an upper millstone on him from the wall, so that he died in Thebez? Why did you get so close to the wall?' If he asks you this, then say to him, 'Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead.'" The messenger set out, and when he arrived, he told David everything Joab had sent to him, and say, "The messenger said to David, 'The men overpowered us and came out against us in the open, but we drove them back to the entrance of the city gate. Then the archers shot arrows at your servants from the wall, and some of the king's men died. Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead.'" David told the messenger, "Say this to Joab, 'Don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. Press the attack against the city and destroy it.' Say this to encourage Joab. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife, and bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord." Hello and welcome to 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 14 through to the end of the chapter. This particular episode reminds me a lot of a poem that a lot of English teachers have taught over the years by Robert Burns, of which a line from it is in popular usage: "The best laid schemes of mice and men. The best laid schemes of mice go often awry." It becomes a euphemism for the plans that we have don't always turn out as expected, even as Burns says, for the promised joy that you may have thought you were going to receive actually ends up being an absolute nightmare. And that is absolutely true for David, and the nightmare he inflicts is upon both Bathsheba and in Uriah's life. And also with Joab in this context here. And you may think, well, Joab's an evil enough man as it is, and just maybe David himself, knowing that, used that to his own advantage. But in reality, the key verse is actually at the end, and we'll get there as well. But let me speak to it first before we come back to it. Verse 27 ends by saying, "But the thing David had done." In other words, the author's not even going to mention it by name because it is so terrible that the king has become a murderer. And not just a murderer singular, murderer plural. In our times of reading the Bible, we often focus on Uriah's death, and so we should. But Uriah was one of a number of men that were killed at the hands of Joab's plan that came to him by David, murdering his own troops. And you may recall a variety of times where David has refused to shed bloodshed over his own men, the men of Israel, the men under Saul's command. He has refused, but to protect himself from the power rape that he inflicted upon Bathsheba, but more importantly in his own eyes, I think, from the knowledge getting out that she is now pregnant, not by Uriah's hand, but by his. He himself is absolutely now using his power for his own evil purposes. But the thing mentioned at the end of our text will become the critical thing for David in the subsequent history of his life, and it's something that we all can forget. In the best laid schemes of mice and men, things do often go awry because they're our schemes, and importantly within the nation of Israel under the effectual leadership of a God king, that is a king who loves God to the extent that he asks God, remember, for his blessing? No. He comes before God and says, "God, let me work for your honor and glory, and then I'll be blessed." And we can, in our weakest moments, and sometimes in our strongest moments where we think life's going well, only consult ourselves, only consult our own plans. And this is exactly what David does. There's been a strong contrast painted throughout 1 and 2 Samuel between the decisions that people have made once they've consulted God versus when they have not. David very rarely makes anything happen that is good without consulting God, without it being God's will. But when he does it, the result is generally disastrous in the long-term nature of himself and in the life of Israel. And sadly, there's going to be a number of those coming up in the chapters to come. But the end of our chapter here is a great line that we should be remembering for our own lives. We may not be murderers. We may not be the type of power-hungry person that David became at this time. We may wish that we were like the man after or woman after God's own heart that David was. But it is a great sign that from another famous novel that power corrupts, and it corrupts absolutely. Why is that true? It's because when we use our own desires for our own ends, it always leads us to forgetting God and putting him out of the picture. And occasionally, evil people will do evil things and continue to do evil to protect the knowledge that they are evil. Sadly, this is David. But as it says here, the thing David had done displeased the Lord. It didn't displease him enough. It didn't displease Joab enough. But it displeased the Lord, which means the Lord will be doing something about it. And whether the Lord did something about it in the short term or the long term or the eternal term, God's knowledge is absolute. He is aware of the things we've done. And therefore, and we'll get to chapter 12 in due course, he will call David to account. As you saw through the story here, David concocted a plan to enable Joab to kill Uriah. But David's plan was half-hearted at best. Shocking military plan. It would have been executed to the extent that everybody under Joab's command would have known. I mean, you don't leave one man out there to be killed by the Ammonites. How would that even happen without others going, how did that happen? So the plan that Joab created makes his own military tactics look bad. He basically sends a group of people to the strongest point of the Ammonite wall and basically draws the Ammonites out. Now you may think that's a good idea, and it would have been, except he didn't then do the next point that anybody would have done in that plan, which is to use a pincer movement from the sides. What did he do? No, as they started to retreat, he didn't attack them from the sides. The same men that drew them out go forward to the very point where the strongest troops of the Ammonites are and where the archers use their power to kill Uriah and others. Joab was drawn into the duplicitous plot to demonstrate David's evilness. But the key thing for both of us, that is you listening and me speaking, is that we can be more like David than we probably would wish to admit to ourselves. When we have power, when we have the ability to make decisions independent of God, do you do so? And if you do, we are making the same types of mistakes that David and Joab are making in this context. We are consulting our own desires, our own definitions of goodness, our own understandings of self-protection, or even just our own understanding of how to run our own life our own way. And we're doing it without any understanding of God's will for our lives. God looks upon human history that consults only itself, and he is displeased. There is a way out, and we'll discover that next week. But the key thing here is, don't be like David. Don't displease the Lord by only consulting yourself in order to solve your own problems. If you've got yourself into a situation in life where you feel like there's no way out, we'll see when we come to 2 Samuel 12, there is a way out, and it's with God. Come to God and ask for his help, ask for his forgiveness. Don't be like David, who uses increasingly terrible decision-making processes. And as he makes them, more and more people are drawn into his web of failure, into his web of evil, and into his web of dying as a consequence. Never be the person who uses their knowledge to enact evil upon others and then tries to cover it up. Or even less, we might think, by our own human standards. making decisions that may go awry, and instead of admitting our error and defeat, we try and cover it up. We try and justify. We try and maybe even bring others in on the lie. God is displeased, and his displeasure will be made known, either straight away, in the short term, the long term, and if not then, the eternal term. Amen.